If you've been around here very long, you know that I'm always asking you, maybe even begging you, that anytime you start a new piece, think about the key that the piece is written in and be practicing the scale of that piece, of that key, as often as possible. Best case scenario in every single practice session. If you've ever found yourself thinking, okay, that's a great idea, but how on earth do I know what key my piece is written in? I've got the solution for you today. We're basically just going to do a little workshop. We're going to look at a few different pieces in a few different keys, and I'm going to walk you step by step through the process of how you can figure out which key your piece is actually written in. There is one tool that I'm going to suggest you use. It's called the circle of fifths. The circle of fifths is this brilliant little thing. It looks like a clock, and it has the 12 major and 12 minor keys all lined up nice and neat. I love the circle of fifths because there are so many different things that we can learn from it, and it also just helps us have an overview of exactly how everything in music is interrelated, because music is all about connections between different ideas and different keys and different chords, and we can see a lot of those relationships on the circle of fifths if we know what to look for. If you don't already, I would really recommend printing out a circle of fifths and just keeping it at your piano so that you always have it there anytime you have a question. So let's start with the simplest solution. Sometimes you will have a piece that's called Minuet in G major, and then G major is going to be your key. The composers aren't trying to trick us, the publishers aren't trying to say, ooh, got him that time. If it's written out in the title of your piece, that's obviously the key that you're looking for. And then if you're not sure of the fingering for the scale, I do have a PDF with all of the scale fingerings that you can download for free, and just make sure that you're practicing that and using quality fingerings while you're approaching your scales also. But then of course, the majority of music doesn't actually tell us which key our piece is in. So I'm gonna grab some music and let's have a look. Before we really get into the nitty-gritty of this topic, I want to make sure that you're familiar with a few key terms. And I'm going to be using them interchangeably in the video because they essentially mean the same thing. So anytime we're playing in a key, our two most important chords, without a doubt, are the most important is our tonic chord, or our one chord. And again, I'll be using these interchangeably. Tonic, or our one chord, is just the chord that's built on the first note of the scale. So if we're in C major, it's a C major chord. If we're in A minor, it's an A minor chord. If we're in D major, it's a D major chord, and so on. Very easy to keep up with. The other chord we need to keep an eye on is our dominant chord, or our 5 chord. Again, these terms are interchangeable. Just make sure that you know what both of them mean, because I do kind of intuitively say one and then say the other, and I want to make sure you know what I'm talking about as we're walking through. So our 5 chord it's easy to remember it as the 5 chord because it's built on the 5th note of the scale. So in C major, G is our 5, and when we build a chord on that 5th note of the scale, we get G major, and that is our dominant chord. Sometimes the dominant will also have a 7. We also call it a 5-7, dominant 7, 5-7, dominant 5. All the same thing. For the intents and purposes of this video, it completely 100% interchangeable. So first, let's walk through some pieces in this collection, Melodious Masterpieces from Jane McGraw. Outstanding piano teacher and pedagogue, and just really nice collections. She has Melodious Masterpieces, she has Masterpieces with Flair, she has a lot of different series, and you can always trust the fingerings that are in here. You can trust there's always an order of difficulty if you want to use that as sort of a guide of knowing what piece to learn next. I cannot recommend her publications enough. She's really incredible. Let's start with a piece called Song Without Words by Fritz Spindler, and this is marked as not having any sharps or flats in the key signature. So if all goes well, then that should mean that if we look at our circle of fifths, no sharps, no flats means it should be either in C major or A minor. The first thing you can do to sort of just get a general idea for whether it's major or minor is to play the opening and to play the ending. So I'm going to play the first row, see how that sounds, play the last row, see how that sounds, and that should give us a pretty good clue already as to which key we're dealing with. Very minor. The left hand is also playing an A minor arpeggio almost the whole time. very good indicator that we're probably in A minor, but let's check the end just to make sure. So let's see how that sounds. It also ends in A minor. And so that can already give you a very good clue. This is maybe not foolproof, and maybe you're not so comfortable with telling by ear if something is major or minor. So what other clues can we go on? What other hints do we have in our music that give us an idea? So again, it starts with A minor and finishes with A minor in the left hand, and the right hand also finishes on an A minor arpeggio. So that's also a very good clue. And then we also see several sharps popping up. And to be specific, in a minor key, often it's going to be the next to last note of the scale. So for an A minor, A, B, C, D, E, F, this G sharp is what we're going to be looking for in particular when we're first trying to decide which key we're in. Because this G sharp will almost never pop up in C major, certainly not in the first couple of measures, and certainly also not in the last couple of measures. So this G sharp is another very good clue that we're in A minor. So this piece is, of course, in fact, in A minor. Next, let's take a look at a piece that's right on the opposite page from Song Without Words in this book, Chord Study. So when we look at this piece, we have one sharp, and if we look at our circle of fifths, that means we should be dealing with either G major or E minor. So again, first way we can tell is by playing the opening and playing the ending and seeing how it sounds. Sounds pretty major. Let's have a look at the end just to be sure. Again, if you're not so sure, just based on the sound, you can take a closer look at what chords we have. You're starting on G major, G major, D major, D major, G major. That's still basically G major, D major, D7, G major. And so if we have a lot of your tonic and dominant chords in the very beginning, very strong clue. And then especially at the very end, it's quite chromatic. We have some diminished chords, some minor, some funny things floating around. But then when we get to the very end, we have one, a G major chord in the second inversion, very common pattern, 5, 7, 1. And that is just our classic ending. If we have 1, 5, 1 in the major or minor key, just whichever one you see. So since it's G major, D7, G major, we can really expect, okay, that's the nail in the coffin. This piece is in G major. Then let's have a look at another piece that just has one sharp. So again, we're dealing with either G major or E minor. This is a very famous piece as a prelude by Chopin, his 4th prelude, and it's often published with the key. I'm not going to say the key yet, just so that we can listen and have a look at the clues, and I think it will pretty quickly become clear which key we're dealing with here. So. The opening is much more chromatic, and then let's have a look just at the very, very end. So it probably sounds quite minor to you, but at the beginning it does sort of shift fairly quickly and it ends up somewhere that we maybe don't expect. So let's have a closer look at these chords. So we're starting with B, fits very nicely into both keys, hard to tell. Then we start with E minor. That doesn't necessarily mean the piece is in E minor, but it's not a bad sign. Then we have this chord fits into both keys, hard to tell. A flat is maybe more likely to pop up in a minor key just because it's this darker sound. We have this diminished chord. And then we're landing on an E major dominant, an E dominant chord, which would be extremely unusual in G major. To have a G sharp mixed into, it's also fairly unusual for E minor, but in minor keys we see a lot more of this, what we call mode changing, that we start in minor and switch to sort of a major color, and then it goes back and forth and plays around. Harmony tends to be more flexible and more adventurous in a minor key for whatever reason. And then if we look at the chords at the very end, this is leading up to a B chord. Here we have a nice B major, which is our dominant chord in E minor, and we end in E minor. And if we're starting in E minor and finishing in E minor, we're in E minor. If it looks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's the key. Then let's have a look at a piece from this collection. This is also a very popular collection of piano pieces. Has a really nice mix of fairly simple all the way up to like early intermediate pieces. It's called Easy, Classics to Moderns. Never let easy on a piano book deter you from looking a little bit further. Often easy means easy compared to Chopin etudes and Beethoven sonatas, and if you struggle with music in a book that says easy, do not be discouraged. It's often a huge misnomer. Now let's have a look at a piece by Joseph Haydn. It's from a set of pieces called 7 German Dances. We're looking at the 6th one, and we immediately see that we have 4 sharps in our key signature. If we look at our trusty circle of fifths, that means we are either in E major or C sharp minor, and let's go through the same steps. Play the opening, play the ending, and then look for some clues. So that's already half of the piece. It sounds quite major, and the piece is just not very long, and it's pretty quick. Just to be sure, let's have a look at the last line also to make sure it confirms what we've heard so far. Also sounds very major. So then let's look for some clues. Our opening doesn't have any chords. We just have single notes in both hands. The hands are playing the same notes the whole time. Our first measure outlines E major, then we step down. That's all just an E major scale, essentially. We outline the chord, then we step back down, dance around it a little bit. It is a dance. And then here we have F sharp to B, which outlines our dominant chord. Same thing, except it ends with E major. Then our ending does have chords. And for the chords, we have E major for 2 whole measures, B7, E major. The whole piece is 1-5-1. It doesn't even adventure beyond this E major, B major, back to E major pattern. This piece is very clearly in E major. Last but not least, let's have a look at a piece by Johann Sebastian Bach. The pieces up until now have been pretty straightforward for deciding the key. Here, I chose this example because it's not always super straightforward to tell which key you're dealing with, and this one has an interesting twist that makes things a bit more complicated. But we're gonna walk through it. So this piece, the key signature, has 3 flats. That tells us on our circle of fifths that we either have E flat major or C minor. And let's go through the same steps as all of the other pieces. We're going to play the opening, play the ending, and then see if we need to look for more clues. For starters, it sounds mostly minor, but it's still somehow a little bit hard to tell. So let's have a look at the end. major chord, but which major chord is it? We have G, B, D, G. We have a G major chord at the end, which is neither C minor nor E flat major. So then what on earth do we do? For starters, this is extremely unusual. 99% of standard classical repertoire starts either with the dominant or the tonic and finishes on the tonic. 99% of music finishes on the tonic. This is an exception to that rule. So as a next step, just with deductive reasoning, G major does not at all fit into the key of E flat major. E flat major contains the chord G minor. It would be very unusual to see a G major chord within the context of E flat major, especially at the end. It's also extremely unusual to see at the end of a piece in C minor, but not so strange because it is the dominant. It's still part of that C minor world. We just natural that B flat, and we see lots of B naturals throughout the entire piece. So we can already almost with complete certainty say, okay, this piece is in C minor at least most of the time. Then beyond that, if we wanted to dig a little bit deeper, we start with C minor. We have 2 whole measures of C minor, and then we have a measure of F minor. Both of these also fit in with the key of E flat major, so it's not necessarily decided yet, but then we see a B diminished chord, B diminished 7, fully diminished 7, quite unusual for E flat major. And from there we go to C minor. We don't stay on C minor very long, then we start to wander around. It goes to A flat major, kind of, A flat 7, we see an F sharp diminish. It's a very chromatic, unusual piece in many ways. But since we've gone already through the first half of the first page and haven't seen a single E flat major chord, we can pretty much land on the fact that, okay, this piece is in C minor and Bach is just having fun playing around with some different harmonies. So hopefully you can see how you can take this and run with it in your own practicing. Print out a circle of fifths so that you have everything you need, and you can really learn so much about your music just from that handy little tool and looking at a few patterns within your music. Music theory doesn't have to be scary, it doesn't have to be complicated, and it can really help us start to understand our music on a deeper level. So drop all of your music theory questions in the comments, and I will keep making videos for you explaining these simple things and how you can start to approach them in a very hands-on way, because music theory, if it's only theory, really doesn't serve us very much, but we can really start to get our hands dirty and play around with the ideas and start to understand, aha, that's why it matters. And that is very cool. So as always, I look forward to hearing from you and how you're progressing with your pieces. And until next time, happy practicing.